Somehow, they got into the pipes, into the communication lines. Sometime a long time ago, before my father and even my grandfather was born, in the city of the dead which lies above us, there was a little river. People who lived there knew how to lock this river and to direct it into pipes under the earth where it probably flows until today. And it looks like this time someone's buried the river Styx itself in these pipes. Your friend was speaking not in his own words. No, it wasn't him. Those were the voices of the dead. He was hearing them in his head and repeating them, and then they absorbed him. Artyom stared at Khan and could not avert his gaze from the man's face for the duration of his monologue. Indistinct shadows skittered across Khan's face, and his eyes were flaring with some internal fire. Towards the end of the story, Artyom was almost sure that Khan was mad, that the voices in the pipes had whispered something to him too, and though Khan had saved him from death and shown him such hospitality, the thought of staying with him for any length of time was uncomfortable and unpleasant. He needed to think about how to move on through the most evil of all the tunnels in the metro, about which he heard much, from Sakharovskaya to Turgenevskaya and farther. So, you'll have to forgive me for my little lie, Khan added after a short pause. Your friend's soul didn't go up to the Creator. It won't reincarnate and come back in a new form. It joined the other unhappy ones in the pipes. These words reminded Artyom that he had planned to go back for Bourbon's body in order to bring it to the station. Bourbon had said that his friend that he had friends here, friends who would take Artyom back if they arrived successfully. This reminded him of the rucksack, which Artyom had not yet opened, and in which, apart from Artyom's machine gun, there might be something useful. But to take it over was somehow frightening, and superstitious of all kinds climbed into Artyom's head, and he decided to open it only slightly, and to peek into it without touching or moving anything. You don't need to be afraid of it, Khan said to Artyom unexpectedly, as though he could feel his trepidation. The thing is yours, or is now yours. I think what you did is called looting, Artyom said quietly. You don't need to be afraid of retribution. He won't reincarnate, said Khan, not replying to what Artyom said, but to what was flittering about in Artyom's head. I think that when they get taken into the pipes, the dead lose themselves. They become part of a whole. Their will is dissolved into the will of the rest of them, and reason dries up. There's no more individual. But if you're afraid of the living and not the dead, well then, drag this bag into the middle of the station and empty its contents onto the floor. Then no one will accuse you of thieving, and your conscience can be clean. But you tried to save the guy. You tried to save the guy, and he would be grateful to you for that. Consider that this bag is your repayment or his repayment to you for what you did. He was speaking so authoritatively and with such conviction that Artyom gained the courage to put his hand into the pack, and he started to take things out of it and lay them on the tarpaulin to see them in the light of the fire. There were 4 extra cartridges of Bourbon's gun, in addition to the 2 that he had taken out when he gave the gun to Artyom. It was surprising that the traitor had such an impressive arsenal. Artyom carefully wrapped up 5 of the cartridges he found in their cloth and put them into his rucksack, and he put one of the Kalashnikov in the Kalashnikov. He put one in the Kalashnikov. The weapon was in excellent condition, thoroughly oiled and looked after. The lock moved smoothly, giving off a dull click when pushed, and the safety catch was a bit stiff. All this indicated that the gun was practically new. The handle fitted comfortably into his hand, and its shank was well polished. The weapon gave off a feeling of reliability and encouraged calmness and confidence. Artyom immediately decided that if he were to take any one thing from Bourbon, it would be this gun. The 7.62 cartridges that Bourbon had promised him for his hoe weren't there. It wasn't clear how Bourbon had been planning to pay Artyom. Artyom thought about it and came to the conclusion that it may be that Bourbon hadn't been planning to give him a thing, but having passed through the dangerous part, he would sling a shot into the back of Artyom's head and throw him down a shaft and think no more of it. And if anyone had asked him about Artyom's whereabouts, then he would have any number of answers. Anything can happen in the metro, and well, the boy agreed himself to come along. Apart from various rags, a map of the metro imprinted with notations that only its dead owner would understand, and 100 grams of weed. he found a few pieces of smoked meat in plastic bags and a notebook at the bottom of the rucksack. Artyom didn't read the book, and he was disappointed in the rest of the stuff. In the depths of his soul, he had hoped to find something mysterious, maybe something precious. The reason that Bourbon was so intent on getting through the tunnel to Shakharovskaya, he decided that Bourbon was a messenger or maybe a smuggler or something in the kind. This at least explained his determination to get through the damn tunnel at any price and his readiness to be generous. But since there was not much left in the rucksack after he'd pulled out the last pair of linen pieces, Artyom decided that the reason for his insistence had to have been something else. Artyom racked his brains for a long while about what Bourbon needed at Sekharovskaya, but he couldn't think of anything plausible. Then he remembered that he had left the poor man in the middle of the tunnel, left him to the rats, even though he had planned to go back and do something about the body. True, he had only a vague idea of how to give the traitor his final honors and what to do with the corpse. Burn it? But you needed strong nerves for that, and the suffocating smoke and the stink of the burning meat and the burning hair was sure to filter through the station, and then he wouldn't be able to avoid unpleasantness. Dragging the body to the station would be heavy and awful. It's one thing to pull a man along by the wrist if you think he's alive and you're pushing away all thoughts of the fact that he's not breathing and has no pulse. But it's another thing to pull along a corpse. So what then? Just like Bourbon lied to him about his payment, he might have been lying about his friends here in the station. Then Artyom, having dragged the body back here, might just be putting himself in a worse situation. So, what do you do here with those that die? Artyom asked Khan after a long bout of thinking. What do you mean, my friend? Khan answered a question with a question. Are you talking about the souls of the deceased or about their perished bodies? About the corpses, Artyom growled. He was becoming fed up with his talk of the netherworld. There are two tunnels that go from Prospect Mir to Sakharovskaya, Khan said, and Artyom thought to himself that trains went in two directions, so they always needed two tunnels. So why would Bourbon, knowing about the second tunnel, want to go towards his fate? Was there an even greater danger hiding in the second tunnel? But you can only go through it alone, the man continued, because in the second tunnel, near our station, the ground sags, the floor has collapsed, and now there's some kind of deep ravine where, according to local legend, a whole train fell through the ground. If you stand on one end of the ravine, it doesn't matter which, then you can't see the other end of and you can't see the other end, and the light of even the strongest flashlight won't illuminate the depths. And so all sorts of blockheads say that it's a bottomless pit. This ravine is our cemetery. We put all of our corpses up in there. Artyom started to feel ill when he realized that he would have to go to the place where Khan had picked him up to drag Bourbon's rat-gnawed body to the station and to the ravine in the second tunnel. He tried to convince himself that throwing the corpse into the ravine was the same, in essence, as throwing it into a tunnel, because you can't call either one a burial. But just when he was ready to believe that the leaving everything as it was the best solution to the solution, Bourbon's face appeared in front of his eyes with amazing clarity, saying, "I've died." Artyom immediately was drenched with sweat. He got up with difficulty, put his new machine gun on his shoulder and said, "Okay, I'm off." I promised him. We had an agreement. I need to. And with that, he started to walk down the hall with stiff legs and onto the iron stairs which led down to the tunnel from the platform. It was necessary to turn on his flashlight even before he went down the stairs. Thundering down the stairs, Artyom stopped dead for a moment, not wanting to step any further. A heavy air blew a rotting smell in his face, and for an instant his muscles refused to obey him. He tried to force himself to take another step. When he overcame his fear and repulsion and started to walk on, a heavy palm was placed on his shoulder. He cried out in surprise and turned around sharply, his chest tight, understanding that he wouldn't have time to grab the machine gun from his shoulder. He wouldn't have time for anything. It was Khan. "Don't be scared," he said to Artyom to calm him. "I was just testing you. You don't need to go. Your friend's body isn't there anymore." Artyom stared at him uncomprehendingly. "While you were sleeping, I completed the funeral rite. You have no reason to go. The tunnel is empty." And turning back to Artyom, Khan wandered back towards the arches. Empty, and turning his back, towards the arches. Feeling enormous relief, the young man hurried after him, catching up to Khan in 10 paces. Artyom asked him in an emotional voice, "But why did you do that? And why didn't you tell me? You told me yourself that it didn't matter if he stayed in the tunnel or if he was brought to the station." "For me, it isn't a matter at all," Khan shrugged his shoulders. "But to you, it was important." I know that your journey has a purpose and that your path is long and difficult. I don't understand what your mission is, but its burden will be too heavy for you alone. So, I decided to help you a bit. You looked over at no, he looked over at Artyom with a smile. When they had returned to the fire and sat down on the creased tarpaulin, Artyom couldn't help but ask, "What did you mean when you mentioned my mission? Did I say something in my sleep?" "No, my friend. You were silent as you slept. But I had a vision, and in it I was asked to help by a person who shared part of my name. I was warned of your arrival, and that's why I went out to meet you and pick you up when you were crawling along with your friend's corpse. That's why." Artyom looked at him distrustfully. "I thought it was because you heard shots." "I heard the shots. There was a loud echo here. But you don't really think that I would go into the tunnel every time I hear a shot. I would have come I would have come to the end of my life's path a lot sooner and completely ignominiously if I had done so. But this was an exception." "And what about the person who shares part of your name?" "I can't say who that is. I've never seen him before and have never spoke with him, but you know him. You ought to understand this yourself. I've only seen him once, and even then not in real life, but I immediately felt his colossal strength. He commanded me to help a youth who would come from the northern tunnel, and your image stood before me. This was all a dream, but the feeling that it was real was so great that when I woke up, I could make out the difference between dream and I couldn't make out the difference between dream and reality. This powerful man with a bright shaved head, dressed all in white. You know him?" At this point Artyom shook, and it was as if everything was swimming before him, and the image that Khan was describing was clear in his mind. The man who shared half a name with his rescuer was Hunter Khan Hun. Artyom had a similar vision when he couldn't decide whether to embark on his journey. He saw Hunter, but not in the long black raincoat which he'd worn at VDNKH on that memorable day, but in the formless, snowy white garments. "Yes, I know this man," Artyom said, looking at Khan in a totally new way. "He invaded my dreams, and I usually never forgive that. But everything was different with him," Khan said distractedly. He needed my help just as you did, and he didn't order me to do it, didn't ask me to submit to his will, but it was more like he was asking me persistently. He wasn't able to crawl inside and wander through someone else's thoughts, but he was having a hard time, a very hard time. He was thinking about you in desperation and needed a helping hand, a shoulder to lean on. I extended a hand to him and gave him my shoulder. I went to meet you. Artyom was buried in thoughts that were seething and floating up to his consciousness one after the other and dissolving, never making it into words, and then sinking back down to the depths of his mind. His tongue was stiff, and the young man took a long time to conjure up even a word. Could this man have really known of his arrival beforehand? Could Hunter have somehow warned him? Was Hunter alive, or had he been turned into a bodiless shadow? He was going to have to believe in this nightmarish and delirious story for of the netherworld that had been described by Khan, but it was easier and more pleasant to tell himself that the man was just crazy. But the most important thing was that this man knew about the task that faced him. He had called it a mission, and though he was probably having a hard time figuring out what it was, he had understood its importance and gravity. "Where are you going?" Khan asked Artyom, quietly, calmly, looking high in the eye as though he was reading his thoughts. "Tell me where your path lies, and I will help you make your next step towards your goal, if it is within my power." He asked me to do that. "Polis," Artyom exulted. "I need to get to Polis." "And how do you intend to get there from this godforsaken station?" Khan inquired. "My friend, you should have gone up to the ring from Prospect Mir to Kurskaya or to Kieevskaya. The Hansa are there, and I don't know anyone there, so I won't be able to get through. And anyway, now I can't return to Prospect Mir. I'm afraid that I won't be able to stand another journey through that tunnel. I was thinking of getting to Turgenovskaya." I looked at an old map, and it says that there's a passage there to Shretinsky Boulevard. There's a half-built tunnel there, and you can get to Trubnaya through it. Artyom took the charred map out of his pocket. "From Trubnaya, there's a passage to Svintonoy Boulevard. I saw it on the map, and from there, if everything is fine, you can get to Polis directly." "No," Khan said sadly, shaking his head. "You won't get to Polis via that route. The map is lying. They printed them way before everything happened. They described metro lines that were never fully built. They describe stations that have collapsed, burying hundreds of innocents, and they don't say anything about the frightening dangers that are hidden along the way and will make most itineraries impossible. Your map is as stupid and naive as the 3-year-old child. Give it to me. He held out his hand. Artyom obediently gave him the piece of paper. Khan immediately screwed up the map and threw it into the Khan immediately screwed up the map and threw it into the fire. Artyom thought that this was a bit excessive, but had decided not to argue about it. When Khan said, "And now, show me the map that you found on your friend's rucksack." Rummaging through his things, Artyom found the map, but he wasn't in a rush to give it to Khan. Thinking about the unfortunate fate that may lie ahead of it, he didn't want to be left without any map. Khan noticed his trepidation and hurried to reassure him. "I won't do anything to it, don't worry, and trust me. I never do anything without a reason. You might have the impression that some of my actions have no point and are even a little crazy, but there is a point. You just don't get it because your perception and understanding of the world is limited. You are only at the beginning of your path. You are too young to really know some things." Artyom gave Khan Bourbon's map. He didn't have the strength to eject. It was a yellowed piece of card, the size of a postcard, and it had pretty sparkling balls on it and the words "Happy New Year's 2007. It's very heavy, Khan said hoarsely, and Artyom turned his attention to Khan's palm, which held the piece of card. It suddenly fell to the ground as though the card weighed more than a kilo. A second ago, Artyom hadn't noticed anything heavy about it when he held it in his hand. Paper is paper. "This map is much wiser than yours," Khan said. "It contains such knowledge that I don't believe it belonged to the person who was traveling with you. It's not even that it's marked up with all these notations and signs, although they probably say a lot. No, it has something about it." Its words broke off sharply. No, his words broke off sharply. Artyom looked up and peered at Khan. Khan's forehead was carved with deep wrinkles, and the dying fire appeared to flash in his eyes. His face changed so much that Artyom was frightened and wanted to get out of the station as soon as possible, to go anywhere, even back through the terrible tunnel that he had managed to get through with such difficulty. "Give it back to me, Con." "No, give it back to me." Con wasn't asking, but rather giving an order. "I will give you another one, and you won't know the difference. And I'll throw in anything else you want," he continued. "Take it. It's yours." Artyom easily yielded it, lightly spitting as he uttered the words of agreement. Khan suddenly moved away from the fire so that his face was in the shadows. Artyom guessed that he was trying to take control of himself and didn't want him to be a witness to his inner struggle. "You see, my friend," his voice resounded in the darkness, sort of weakly and indecisively. "Without the power and will it had possessed just a moment before. No, without the will and power it had possessed just a moment before. That's not a map. That's not simply a map. It's a guide to the metro. Yes, there's no doubt that's what it is. The person who holds it can get across the whole metro in 2 days because this map is alive or something. It will tell you itself where to go and how to get. It will warn you of dangers. That is, it will lead you on your way. That's why it's called a guide." Khan moved towards the fire again with a capital letter. "I've heard of them. There are only a few of them in the whole metro, and this may be the last one. It's the legacy of one of the most powerful magicians of the last era. The one who sits at the deepest point in the metro." Artyom decided to flash some knowledge at Khan, but immediately stopped short. Khan's face went dark. "Never speak lightly about things you don't know anything about. You don't know what happens at the deepest point in the metro, and even I only know a little of, and God forbid we ever find out. But I can swear to you that whatever happened there dramatically differs from whatever you heard from your friends. So don't repeat other people's idle imaginings, because one day you'll have to pay for it, and it has nothing to do with the guide." Well, anyway, Artyom hurried to assure him, not wanting to miss a chance to switch the conversation to a less dangerous tack. "You can keep the guide for yourself. After all, I don't know how to use it. And then, I'm so grateful to you for rescuing me that even giving you this map doesn't seem to repay the favor." "That's true." The wrinkles of Khan's face smoothed out, and his voice became soft again. "You won't know how to use it for a long while yet. So if you give it to me, we'll be quits. I have a normal map of the metro lines, and if you want, I can copy the markings of the guide onto it, and you can have it instead. And then he fumbled in his bags. I can offer you this thing, and he brought out a strange shaped flashlight. It doesn't need batteries. It's made so that you just charge it like this manually. Can you see the two little knobs? You have to press them with your fingers, and they manufacture the current themselves, and the flashlight shines. It's not too bright, of course, but there are sometimes situations when this beam seems brighter than the mercury lamps at Polis. It has saved me many times, and I hope that it will prove useful. Take it, it's yours. Take it, take it. The trade isn't fair anyway. It's me who owes you, and not the reverse. In Artyom's opinion, the exchange was actually unusually this was unusually advantageous. What did he need with a map with mystical properties if he was deaf to its voice? He would have thrown it away anyway after turning it over again and again and vainly attempting to read the Curlicue's painting on it. So now the route which you sketched out won't take you anywhere except into the abyss, Khan continued continued the interrupted conversation, holding the map with great care in his hands. Here you go. Take my old one and follow it. He held out a tiny map printed on the other side of an old pocket calendar.